Expectations were low for President Trump's phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But the outcome of that call appears to be way worse than anyone could have expected. I'm going to break down just what has happened and why this should worry everyone, regardless of whether you care about Ukraine or not. Let's get right into it. Okay. So one, do me a quick favor, guys, hit the subscribe button. Apparently the YouTube algorithm has recently shifted and now looks a lot harder at people who subscribe to each video. And that helps it determine if the video should be served to more people. And I think this is actually pretty important to get out there. Okay. So this is a truth by President Trump from, I'm going to say, yesterday afternoon, right? And what he says is he just completed a 2-hour call with Vladimir Putin of Russia. He adds, he says, I believe it went very well. Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire and, more importantly, to end the war. Right? It says the conditions for that will be negotiated between the two parties as it can only be, which doesn't make any grammatical sense, because they know the details of a negotiation that nobody else would be aware of. I think what he's trying to say here, this is really kind of jumbled wording, but what I think he's trying to say is that there are maybe classified aspects or aspects of each side's position that only they know about, which is not really true. I don't know what else to say. It's possible that Russia certainly has a system that is opaque to the U.S., at least somewhat. But Ukraine has been very transparent with the United States. And while many Ukrainian internal factors aren't really seen as that significant to external diplomacy, right? For example, politics within the Russian parliamentary system, generally, Ukraine has been very transparent because it needs to be, right? You cannot have a whole secret agenda when you need your allies to support you, right? And this is something that we've seen with their transparency with the United States, where U.S. forces actually were revealed to be very intimately down to the individual mission assisting Ukrainian planners in 2023 and 2022. So I'm a little skeptical that there's like secret negotiations that no one else understands. And that's usually also kind of can be a cop-out when somebody says, well, it's too complicated, you wouldn't understand. Well, that's what you say when you either can't be bothered to explain it to somebody, or when you just want them to leave you alone. Well, you wouldn't get it, right? That's, for example, when you ask your boss, right, why are you doing this? A good boss is going to say, well, we're doing it for these reasons. A bad boss is going to say, don't worry about it, just do what I tell you. But the worst tier of boss who has zero respect for you and actually doesn't know either or is concealing something nefarious is going to say things like, it's too complicated for you to understand. So already we should worry about this, both because the articulation makes no sense, which is pretty troubling for a U.S. president. And then the idea I think he's trying to express is also sort of indicates that something shady is going on, right? Trump continues, the tone and spirit of the conversation were excellent. Sure, who am I to say not? If it wasn't, I would say so now rather than later. Okay, dude, weird. Russia wants to do large-scale trade with the United States when this catastrophic bloodbath is over, and I agree. I think everybody agrees that they would prefer an economically integrated Russia, but he says there's a tremendous opportunity for Russia to create massive amounts of jobs and wealth. Also true, and this has been true since the 2000s, right? The number one obstacle to Russian prosperity remains the Russian government, as has been the case for the past century, all right? So none of this is new. Right? Likewise, Ukraine can be a great beneficiary on trade in the process of rebuilding its country. Also true. You might recall that Ukraine actually signed a minerals deal with the United States that was seen and actually sold to Ukraine as being just as good as a security guarantee. So again, it's pretty troubling that Ukraine sat there and said, hey, we're signing this deal to reflect the strength of our partnership. But none of this statement feels like Ukraine is a partner. Right now, Trump continues, and this is the part that really, really worries me. He says negotiations between Ukraine and Russia will begin immediately. I have so informed President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, and then the European Commission, France, Italy, Germany, Finland, during a call with me immediately after the call with President Putin. The Pope has stated he would be interested in hosting negotiations. Let the process begin. This is troubling because if you are a viewer of this channel, you know exactly why this is a little scary. It's because 5 days ago, a direct ceasefire and peace meeting occurred that the U.S. backed between Zelensky and his Ukrainian team and a Russian delegation. Now, the Russians did everything they could to sabotage this peace deal. For example, initially having Vladimir Putin endorse it, but then have him not show up and have only Zelensky show up. Putin also, instead of sending a senior official like Sergei Lavrov, Gerasimov, or another senior official with the weight and heft and authority to negotiate, they sent the Russian equivalent to the Secretary of Interior, an incredibly low-level cabinet position without any of the authority. The Russian team also threatened the Ukrainian diplomats, stating that their loved ones would be killed, which, FYI, guys, if you're ever negotiating, let's say, for a new car, and the salesman threatens to kill your family, you should leave that dealership. That's not someone who's interested in selling you a car. It's probably someone who's interested in killing your family. So all of this, right, the fact that this occurred 7 days ago, in fact, as of the tweet, it was occurring literally like just 4 or 5 days before this tweet, it's very, very worrying. And in fact, according to Axios, President Zelensky had to remind President Donald Trump on his phone call that negotiations with Russia were already happening, they had already happened. And Trump announced EU leaders and talked about their readiness for talks, right? The exchange reportedly took place during this phone call. Let's see if we can find it here. Right. Of course, Vladimir Putin did in this call what he seems to always do, which is provide vague assurances that he wants to be involved in the peace process, that he's interested in a ceasefire, but has repeatedly rejected Ukrainian offers of a ceasefire. Ukrainians are like, we can stop fighting whenever you want. We'll literally stop fighting at any time. And Vladimir Putin has repeatedly rejected this. Trump told leaders, this is the part that feels a little bit like a red alert. Trump told leaders that Putin agreed to start direct negotiations on a ceasefire immediately, which led to a few seconds of puzzled silence during the call. Zelensky then reminded Trump that Putin had previously already agreed to this, and the first round of direct talks had already taken place on May 16th, 3 days prior, marking the first direct talks between Kiev and Moscow since 2022. Trump did not directly respond, right? Of course, the Ukrainian president also pointed to Trump that it was his idea to start the peace talks with an immediate 30-day ceasefire, which did not occur, right? Kiev also proposed a 30-day ceasefire on March 11th that Moscow rejected. And Trump has repeatedly threatened to impose additional sanctions on Russia unless it accepts the deal, but he hasn't actually gone ahead and done it, right? And participants on the call were surprised that Trump was, quote, relatively content with what he heard from Putin, even though the Kremlin's position has not changed. Trump presented this as a new development in the negotiating process. And this is troubling for a host of reasons, but most notably, it reflects that the U.S. president seems unable to synthesize new information. For example, as we've pointed out, there have been repeated truces that Russia has reportedly backed in various forms and then simply walked away from. Remember, this is the third phone call between Trump and Putin that has happened, and each one of those phone calls, Trump walks away believing he has negotiated some form of progress towards peace, and every time, Vladimir Putin has turned that into a lie. You might recall from just 60 days ago in March, there was an energy and infrastructure ceasefire that Vladimir Putin intentionally pretended to misunderstand, and he continued to target Ukrainian infrastructure, saying that only energy and energy infrastructure was what was protected, something that really is only meaningful to Russia. Ukraine doesn't have really an energy industry. So, but what's really troubling is, again, this idea that the U.S. president was unaware that a U.S. endorsed peace talks had occurred just 72 hours prior. And if you have ever dealt with an aging parent, you know that everyone has moments like these where they have some concerns, maybe things seem a little different. And if you look at Trump's manner of speaking in 2015 during his first campaign to today, you can see it's very different. It's much more jumbled. It's much less articulate. He makes his points much less saliently. And but that's maybe normal aging, right? Everybody gets older, everybody slows down a little bit, and President Trump is nearly 80 years old. But forgetting something that happened 3 days ago, a major geopolitical event, this is really, really troubling because it's a very, very classic sign of changes in cognition, and it is a really troubling trend, right? And remember, on this channel, guys, I literally have a whole video where I said, listen, President Biden, you're clearly cognitively unfit. You clearly lack the ability to govern the country. It is a difficult job for someone who is fully mentally acute. And I was like, dude, you need to resign. And this is, again, I haven't seen enough to be like the president is really unfit for this, but this is really worrying. I would worry a lot if my parent did this, called me and was like, oh, I can't believe I just bought a new car. And you go, you'd be like, hey, Mom, we talked about this 3 days ago. We talked 3 days ago. This already happened. Like, what do you mean you're going to buy a new car? Like, it's in your driveway, dude. The new car's in your driveway. It already went down. So yeah, this is really troubling and really worrying, probably also for Europe. Because remember, this is someone who they have been trying to negotiate with, been trying to extract deals from. In fact, the whole world has been trying to negotiate with this guy and is unable to see, and has been fluxumed, right? The globe is, they say, listen, how do we negotiate these new tariff deals? How do we negotiate this stuff? And the answer is that they don't know. And the answer may not be because Trump is a difficult guy or because Trump is more combative than other presidents. It may literally be because he can't remember. He can't piece together the systematic kind of synthesizing of information, right? And then recall it on a moment's notice. So this is some pretty worrying stuff. But we're also going to talk about other worrying trends within not just the DoD, but within the Secretary of State. But before we do that, I wanted to mention that you guys know that obviously, as we just talked about, I am critical of everybody. I am not a shill for any government, any institution. In fact, this channel hardly gets any sponsors because, well, that's how I'm like, right? But that's okay because you guys have my back over on Combat Vet News. This functions exactly like Patreon. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I find the uncensored combat footage from across the internet, including stuff sent to me straight from units at the front. And we do deep dive, uncensored breakdowns. This is the stuff YouTube would never let me show you. And if you want access to that and the archive of hundreds of these videos going back to the start of the war, you want to sign up at any one of these tiers. But especially if you want the shout outs, if you want to get the by name shout outs at the end of every single video, that is for the Colonel tier. Plus, it gets you access, Lieutenant and Colonel, get you access to the weekly Q&As every Thursday. You can ask me any question. It's basically an AMA. So if you want to support me, keep me independent, and keep me speaking truth to power, even if it's uncomfortable, you want to sign up over on combatvetnews.com. Okay. So let's talk about the other troubling trend here. One, Marco Rubio, this is the Secretary of State, is saying, actually, guys, the U.S. intelligence community is wrong about Tren de Aragua. Now, this is pretty troubling because, bear in mind, guys, the intelligence community in the United States is the synthesis of all of the intelligence agencies, right? This is the CIA, who does foreign intelligence work, the DIA, who does intelligence focused on adversaries, militaries. You have, of course, the Department of Homeland Security that does law enforcement focused intelligence on individuals and entities crossing our border, stuff and people that cross our border to and from. And then you have the FBI who does counterintelligence, right? What are our foreign enemies and adversaries trying to learn about us? And they, of course, combine and feed their information primarily through the Director of National Intelligence, but also through entities like the National Intelligence Council, right? This is sort of the, I'll let Wikipedia tell us. The National Intelligence Council reports directly to the Director of National Intelligence, bridges the U.S. intelligence community with policymakers in the United States, produces a global trends report every 4 years. So this is, again, think of it sort of like if the Director of National Intelligence is the is like the president, the National Intelligence Council is like the cabinet. So it's pretty troubling that all of these guys get together and issued a report where they determined that the Venezuelan government does not control direct Tren de Aragua. This is of course, for those of you that don't know, Tren de Aragua is a Venezuelan criminal enterprise, a transnational gang, focuses on probably drug and human trafficking. But what's critical is that the U.S., in order to speed its deportation and sort of short circuit existing U.S. law around deportation, has said that, listen, we're using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. This is a wartime act meant to say, listen, if there are aliens in the United States, these are non-U.S. citizens or migrants who are operating as agents of a foreign government, you have the right to kick them out, even if they're not necessarily like uniformed combatants. And this act relies on the fact, though, that these individuals have to be acting as agents of a foreign government. The problem is that being a member of a gang is not acting as an agent of a foreign government, right? The intelligence community has said, listen, the Maduro government does not control this gang. They are simply another gang that exists, right? This would be like saying, hey, I think the U.S. government actually controls the Crips or the Bloods, right? You'd be like, that's ridiculous. You would need to have, if it's true, you would have to provide some tremendous evidence for it. And the intelligence community says there's no evidence that this is anything other than a bunch of Venezuelan guys operating as a drug gang, which means that the Alien Enemies Act could not be invoked. So, therefore, the Secretary of State says, actually, guys, everyone whose job it is to keep me and the other members of my cabinet informed are wrong. I would rather operate with my own set of information. Where is he getting it from? That's the real troubling thing. If the Secretary of State won't listen to his CIA, his DIA, his Homeland Security folks, the Department of State's own intelligence wing, if he's not willing to listen to them, then who on earth is giving him information? Where is he getting his information from? Is he getting it from social media? We've seen with Elon Musk, right? He gets his worldview from social media, and you can see that he's incompetent. He can't do literally anything right. Remember, he was social media told him he could cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. Instead, he got less than $100 billion, right? Of cuts, and most of those have been ruled illegal and have been restored. So this is just absolutely another troubling trend, a disconnect between the reality, right? Well-researched, well-established reality and the fantasy that the administration feels like they're operating under. And again, Marco Rubio is much younger. He probably doesn't have dementia. He probably doesn't have a severe mental illness, right? He probably is cognitively intact, but he simply is out here carrying water and doing the bidding of someone who it's not clear that they are a rational actor. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm like out here a massive administration hater. I give credit where credit's due. And guess what? This administration, to their credit, they have gone after corruption in the DoD. I thought this story was crazy, and I think this is actually awesome. This is a 4-star admiral, Admiral Robert Burke, right? A 62-year-old, 4-star admiral, one of the highest ranking, the highest ranking rank in the Navy, right? So let's see if we can find this guy on Wikipedia. This dude is again, he's so big, he has a Wikipedia entry. That should tell you something there. He is a retired U.S. naval admiral who's commander of U.S. forces or U.S. naval forces in Europe and Africa, Allied Joint Force Command Naples, a 57th Naval Chief of Personnel and Vice Chief of Naval Operations. His rank was full admiral, the equivalent of a 4-star rank. So the highest rank that you can hold. And this is absolutely, he would be one of the highest ranking individuals ever charged by the DoD for a crime. And what's fascinating is what was his crime? What his crime was that he essentially directed contracts, right? Steered taxpayer money to a shady business that had promised him a lucrative job when he retired, right? And you can see after retiring from the Navy, Burke took a job at a company called NextJump. NextJump is a privately held, it says it's a technology and services company, but what it does is manage employee engagement and rewards programs to large corporation. And but what's important is that it was providing a basic level of training to the Navy on something. So NextJump went to this 4-star admiral and said, listen, we want to bring you on board after you leave, but you have to do something for us, right? And let's see if we can find the nice summary here, right? So the CEOs of NextJump were also charged in the same crime, in the same trial, and they provided a workforce training program to a small component of the Navy in 2019. The Navy said, listen, you're not working out. This training isn't effective. It's not working for us. We're terminating our contract. And they said, listen, as is standard with this termination agreement, you cannot contact Burke about the contract. Now, despite this, the co-defendants did meet with Burke in 2021, trying to reestablish their business with the Navy. At the meeting, the defendants agreed that Burke would use his position as a Navy 4-star admiral and steer a contract towards this company, towards NextJump. In exchange, he would get employment at the company, right? Now, they said he would use his influence and position to get naval officers to award the contract to steer a large contract, a full, something to train a huge portion of the entire Navy. One of the co-defendants estimated that this contract would be worth in the triple-digit millions. That's $100 million plus contract to train the Navy to do a certain thing. And so in December 2021, Burke did his job. He did his future job, directing his staff to award a $500,000 contract to NextJump to train personnel in Italy and Spain. Then Burke went to his friends and said, listen, you guys should really consider signing on with NextJump. They are really good. And to conceal the scheme, Burke made several false and misleading statements to the Navy, including falsely implying that company's employment discussions with Burke only began months after the contract was awarded, and omitting the truth on his required government ethics disclosure forms. Here's the kicker. Here's what I think is just chef's kiss, right? You're a 4-star admiral. You are responsible for a huge portion of the entire Department of Defense budget, right? He probably supervised billions in terms of facilities, naval vessels, personnel. We're talking, if this were a company, it would probably be a Fortune 500 company for sure, just based on the resources he controls. What then did NextJump, who, by the way, told him that this was a $100 million contract? What do you think he got of that $100 million contract? What was his kickback? 1%, 2%, 3%, maybe 10% of the contract, right? $10 million. That sounds about right. You literally won them the contract. Shouldn't you be getting 10, 15% of the contract? No. They were able to bribe this admiral for no shit, $500,000 and $100,000 in stock options. Guys, that is as much as a hardworking surgeon makes. Now, no shade. Obviously, that puts him in the 1% of U.S. income earners. But this dude committed a fucking crime, lied about it, jeopardized everything in order to make 500 G's. Which, by the way, guys, I just want to point out, pay scale, 4-star admiral, right? The monthly basic pay for a 4-star admiral, lads, is $18,000 a month. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that is not including a huge housing bonus, right? When you add in total compensation, you might be looking at over $250K a year, right? So again, that is base pay right there. So yeah, you're looking at easy $250K, probably closer to 300. Absolutely, unbelievably high. But also like, yo, dude, you committed a crime to make a little extra juice. Dude, you didn't even have to work. You had your pension. You didn't have to work at all. Most 5-star admirals don't just operate on greed. And this is troubling, not so much. One, shout out to the U.S. attorney for investigating this, charging him, and putting him in jail. That's where he belongs. Because you can't sell out this country for money. And that's the thing that's troubling. It's not that this happened, right? Because the harm to the taxpayer is significant, but not really that significant. What's troubling is that this created a norm, and it sent a message across the force that said that while you're a naval ensign on an exhausting ship tour, you're an understaffed chief petty officer trying to do more with less, right? Or you're these Navy SEALs. Remember, last year, while this guy was taking these bribes, Navy SEALs were drowning in the Red Sea trying to stop Iranian missile parts from getting to the Houthis. How does that feel? How do you think that feels to the family to be like, this dude was selling out the country for 500 racks, right? While the rank and file were putting their lives on the line for a fraction of this, right? The whole reason people show up and risk their lives in a military is because they believe that the people above them are something other than total fucking crooks. And the fact is that this dude, when push came to shove, he already had all the money he needed. He had his pension locked in. He was done. And he was like, I am willing to commit crimes to get a little more money, right? It's not about doing right by soldiers. It's not about doing right by sailors. It's about me getting money. That's the most important thing. Even when I have all the money and all the power and all the authority, I still want more. That's, to me, that infects the entire system. All these guys that leave the service and take up these kind of positions. It colors all of them and makes you go, okay, sure. He sat down and said, I give you contract, you give me job. But, what if you're Raytheon and you say, listen, we never talked to Admiral Snuffy. We never had to. Admiral Snuffy always knew that Raytheon's bids would just get that extra look. That when everyone else was equal, they knew that Raytheon, we were always on top. And he knows that those long-term contracts with a lot of lock-in, he always went to bat for us. So Raytheon doesn't need to be told that's where he needs to work. They say, well, of course. And he's the most qualified. Admiral Snuffy's so qualified because look at all the Raytheon contracts he supervised. We would be crazy not to. And then when we bring him on board, making a lot of money as a senior super vice president, what message does that send to the other 4 stars? It says, hey guys, we noticed, here's Admiral Snuffy. Remember, he supervised all those Raytheon contracts. He made sure we won them all, right? And now look at him, happy as can be in his vice president role in Raytheon. Wouldn't you like to be a Raytheon vice president. And so that is and none of that is illegal. The only parts he was not committing a crime only until he met with them and negotiated for a job while he was still pushing for the contracts. That was his only mistake. That was the part where it went from a corruption to a crime. But again, this is explicitly what is always sort of implicitly happening. And that's the hard part. That's what makes military service so hard for rank and file, is to see stories like this. But good on the administration for going after him. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to our Colonel tier members, folks like T.R. Reed, Alan Knutson, C.M. Holmes, Alan Knutson again, C.M. Holmes again, Steve Moran, Citronics, Paul Templeton, Chris Gorsuch, Yanko Georgiev, Bastian Himmerling, B. Himmerling, and James Porsche, as well as all of our lieutenant tier members. You guys are the OGs. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you over on Combat Vet News for today's video. It's the second part of the Azov Brigade in Touretsk. Buckle up. It's going to get crazy. See you in the next one. Cheers.